Evelyn Harper knew that because she had placed it there herself, sometime around the winter storm 3 years ago, tucked behind a stack of paper grocery bags she'd been saving because they were too sturdy to throw out. But when she reached for it in the dark, her elbow brushed a leaning tower of boxes, and the whole thing lurched toward her with a dry, papery groan. For one breathless second, she thought the house was finally collapsing on top of her. A carton of old church bulletins slid first. Then a tin full of loose screws hit the floor. Then 3 yellowed magazines fanned open at her feet like startled birds. Evelyn caught herself against the wall, heart pounding so hard it made the darkness feel alive. "Mom!" The porch light spilled through the front window just as her daughter Mara stepped inside with her key. Her voice cracked sharp and frightened. "What happened?" "I'm fine," Evelyn snapped, too quickly, too proudly. Mara hurried down the hallway and stopped at the sight of the mess. Boxes leaned against boxes. Coats hung from doorknobs because the closet was full. A milk crate of extension cords sat beneath a shelf bowed under old binders, plastic flower pots, and folded shopping bags stacked like bricks. Mara looked at her mother, then at the flashlight lying half-buried under a rain of old receipts. "Mom," she said quietly, "what exactly are you saving all this for?" That question landed harder than the falling boxes had. Evelyn straightened her cardigan, though her fingers trembled. "I was looking for the flashlight. That's all. There's no need to make a federal case out of it." Mara bent to pick up the tin of screws. "You have rusted hardware in a cookie tin." "And?" Evelyn lifted her chin. "Some of those are still perfectly good." Mara gave her that tired, careful look. The one that said she was trying not to push too hard. "You say that about everything." The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tapping of rain against the windows. It had been raining since late afternoon, one of those cold gray spring rains that made the rooms feel smaller. The lamps cast warm pools of light, but there were shadows everywhere now, tucked between piles of newspapers, old lampshades, storage bins, bundled up curtains, and the narrow paths Evelyn had carved through the clutter over the years. To Mara, it looked like a house filling up. To Evelyn, it looked like a house prepared. She reached down and picked up the flashlight, clicking it once just to prove she had found it. The beam flickered weakly, then steadied. "See. Worth keeping." Mara let out a slow breath. "That's not the point." "It is exactly the point." "No. The point is you almost got hurt trying to dig through things you don't even use." "I use plenty. Mom, half this house is things you might use someday." Evelyn lifted her chin. "And someday comes around more often than people think." Mara looked around the hallway, where a person had to turn sideways to pass between a folding chair and a tower of banker's boxes labeled in Evelyn's neat handwriting. Taxes. Christmas cords. Good buttons. Manuals. Candles. Saved paper. Mara closed her eyes for a second. "Mom." That one word, soft and worn thin, nearly broke something open. But Evelyn felt the old reflex rise in her just as quickly. Defend. Explain. Hold the line. "You didn't grow up the way I did," she said. "You don't throw away something useful just because it looks old." Mara's face shifted. "This isn't about a few useful things." "Isn't it?" Evelyn's voice sharpened. "Because I remember years when one good jar mattered. One extra blanket mattered. A box of nails mattered. You learn not to toss out what can still serve a purpose." "That was years ago." "Yes," Evelyn said, her tone suddenly hard as glass. "And that is exactly why I know better than you." Silence spread between them. From the living room came the faint scent of dust and lavender polish. The sofa was half covered in folded linens. A side chair held 3 winter coats no one had worn in ages. Everywhere Mara looked, there was evidence of a life unwilling to discard anything it had once paid for, repaired, touched, or loved. Evelyn saw her daughter's gaze moving across the room, and shame pricked at her, hot and sudden. But shame quickly hardened into anger. She hated that worried look. As if she had become fragile. as if she could no longer be trusted to live among her own things. "They're just items," Maura said gently. "You don't have to keep all of it." That was the moment Evelyn felt it. Not irritation. Not embarrassment. Fear. Cold and old and familiar. The kind that had once lived in empty cupboards. The kind that counted pennies at the kitchen table. The kind that folded wrapping paper smooth after Christmas because you didn't know if next year would be leaner. Just items, Maura had said. But Maura had never stood in a grocery store putting canned soup back on the shelf because rent came first. Maura had never turned a worn-out collar inside out to make a shirt last another year. Maura had never learned that what people call junk can become salvation on the exact day life decides to be cruel. Evelyn looked at the boxes around her, at the narrow halls and crowded tables and overfull closets, and for the first time that night, she could not quite tell whether they were protecting her or pinning her in place. Then Maura stepped toward the nearest stack and said very carefully, "Tomorrow, I'm coming back. We're starting with this hallway." Evelyn's stomach dropped. And something in the back bedroom, somewhere behind a shut door no one ever opened, suddenly felt closer than it had in years. The next morning, Evelyn was awake before sunrise. That was nothing unusual. At 74, sleep came in shallow pieces now, never in one long ribbon the way it had when she was young. But this morning she did not lie there listening to the refrigerator hum or the ticking of the hallway clock. She got up at once, pulled on her robe, and stood in the kitchen with both hands wrapped around a mug of instant coffee, staring at the narrow path between the table and the counter. Maura was coming back. The thought sat in her chest like a stone. Outside, the rain had washed everything clean. The yard looked almost too bright, the wet grass shining silver under the early light. But inside the house, nothing had changed. The same stacks. The same careful piles. The same drawers that stuck because too much had been tucked inside them. To anyone else, it was clutter. To her, it was proof. Proof that she had survived years when survival was not a pretty word. Proof that she had known how to stretch, mend, save, and make do. Proof that when life turned sharp, she had not broken. She set her mug down and opened the kitchen junk drawer. It was crammed so full it barely slid. Rubber bands. Old batteries. Take-out menus from restaurants that had long gone out of business. Twist ties. Blunt scissors. Coupons long expired. A tiny screwdriver. 3 packs of matches. And a neat stack of saved aluminum foil she had washed and flattened by hand. Maura would look at that drawer and see nonsense. Evelyn looked at it and saw training. She had been 8 years old the first time she understood that throwing things away could be dangerous. It was winter in Indiana, bitter cold, the kind that made the windows rattle and the pipes groan in the walls. Her mother had stood at the stove stirring a pot of thin potato soup while Evelyn watched her cut mold from the edge of a loaf of bread and save the rest. Nothing was wasted in that house. Not bacon grease. Not string. Not buttons cut from worn shirts before the rags were turned into cleaning cloths. "Fold that paper nice," her mother used to say after Christmas. "Don't tear it. We can use it again." And Evelyn did. She learned to smooth wrinkles with the side of her hand. She learned to rinse glass jars and save them for leftovers, nails, coins, buttons, whatever might need holding someday. She learned that an old coffee can was not trash. It was future storage. A worn blanket was not useless. It was extra warmth if the furnace gave out. A bent nail was still a nail if your hammer knew how to persuade it. Some children grew up learning music, or manners, or how to dream big. Evelyn grew up learning how to prepare for loss before it arrived. Even after the country changed, even after stores got fuller and life looked easier on the outside, that lesson never left her. Scarcity had a way of carving its name into a person. Then she married Daniel, and for a little while, she thought life had turned kind. He was broad-shouldered, easy-smiling, the sort of man who could fix a lamp, carry 2 grocery bags in one hand, and make a joke out of a bad day before it had the chance to ruin dinner. In those early years, when they rented a tiny house with a crooked porch and drafty windows, Evelyn believed they were building something solid. Not rich. Never rich. But steady. Then came the layoff. Then the hospital bill after Maura's appendix burst at age 11. Then the winter Daniel's truck died, and the furnace wheezed like an old smoker, and Evelyn stood in the grocery store with a list in her hand, quietly putting things back on the shelf one by one because there was no room for error that week. She could still remember the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the cold handle of the shopping cart, the shame of calculating which canned goods gave the most meals per dollar. A woman nearby had tossed 2 dented cans into a clearance bin without a second glance. Evelyn had taken both. That was the season she started saving everything with a new kind of discipline. Plastic containers, buttons, wrapping paper, bread ties, old towels, broken stools Daniel swore he could repair. She patched Maura's jeans at the knee and then patched the patches when they wore thin. She turned chicken bones into broth. She folded grocery bags and stacked them under the sink until they rose like a paper city. Daniel used to tease her sometimes. "Evie," he'd say, grinning as he opened a cabinet and got attacked by a rain of saved margarine tubs. "If the world ends, you'll be the last woman standing with enough containers to organize the apocalypse." She would swat his arm with a dish towel and laugh. But under the joking, he understood. Because there had been one February when the power bill nearly broke them. One August when Maura needed school clothes and Evelyn quietly sold a bracelet her own mother had left her. One terrible stretch when Daniel picked up night work and came home so tired he fell asleep upright in a chair. You do not walk through years like that and come out believing excess is harmless. You come out believing preparedness is love. Preparedness is dignity. Preparedness is the difference between panic and one more week of getting by. Preparedness is a shelf of canned beans, a drawer full of spare batteries, a box of old coats in case someone needs one when winter bites too hard. That was what Maura did not understand. A car door slammed outside. Evelyn froze. Then came the sound of footsteps on the porch. Firm. Familiar. Followed by another sound she was not expecting at all. A lighter, uneven step, and the bounce of a much younger voice. "Grandma, you awake?" Evelyn's breath caught. Because Maura had not come alone. Evelyn opened the front door with her mouth already set in a thin line. Maura stood there with 2 travel mugs in a cardboard carrier, and that determined look she had inherited from both sides of the family. Beside her was Owen, tall and all elbows now, 16 and growing too fast, with a softness in his face that reminded Evelyn painfully of Daniel. He held a roll of trash bags in one hand and gave her a small, uncertain smile. "Morning, Grandma." Evelyn looked at the bags first. Then at Maura. "You brought backup." "I brought help," Maura said. "I didn't ask for help." Owen shifted his weight. "Mom said maybe you'd want me to carry stuff. Not throw it out. Just carry it." He said it so carefully that Evelyn felt a quick stab of guilt. Behind her, the house smelled faintly of coffee, old paper, and the lavender sachets she kept in the drawers. She could have sent them away. But she was tired. Tired from sleeping badly. Tired from defending herself. Tired from the way that one question from the night before still echoed in her mind. "What exactly are you saving all this for?" She stepped aside. "Garage only," she said. "And nobody throws out anything without asking me first." Maura nodded too quickly. "Fair enough." The garage sat behind the kitchen, its door sticking halfway before giving with a scrape. When Owen pulled it open, daylight spilled across shelves so crowded they looked ready to sigh with relief or collapse from strain. Old paint cans. Coffee tins full of nails. Curtain rods. Tarnished tools. A broken fan. 3 cardboard boxes labeled winter things though no one had opened them in years. On the far wall hung Daniel's workbench, still littered with screws, washers, a dull tape measure, and a pair of cracked leather gloves. Owen let out a low whistle before he could stop himself. "It's not a museum," Evelyn said. "No, ma'am," he answered quickly. "I just mean there's a lot in here. There's history in here." For the first half hour, they moved carefully. Maura made piles on the concrete floor. Keep. Donate. Trash. Evelyn hated those words immediately. They sounded too final. Too clean. Too easy for the weight they carried. So she renamed them out loud. Useful now. Maybe useful later. Absolutely not. Owen nodded as if those categories made perfect sense. He was gentler than his mother. He did not hold things up with that practical expression people where when they have decided emotion is a nuisance. He asked questions instead. What's this for? Evelyn glanced over. He was holding a square tin with a faded picture of butter cookies on the lid. Buttons, she said. He opened it and blinked. You kept all these? Of course I kept all those. There have to be 1,000. There are not 1,000. He smiled. 800 then. She walked over and took the tin from him, though not roughly. Inside, the buttons gave off their soft little clicking sound, like dry rain. Brown coat buttons. Shirt buttons. Pearl buttons. Odd singles from things long gone. My mother saved them, Evelyn said more quietly now. Then I saved them. If a button popped off a good coat, you didn't run to the store if you didn't have to. Owen lifted one from the tin, a dark brass one with a lion stamped on the front. This one's kind of cool. Evelyn stared at it. Daniel's winter coat. The one he wore the year the truck broke down in January, and he still found a way to get to work every morning. She had re-sewn that button one night under the kitchen light while he slept in the chair. It was your grandfather's, she said. Owen placed it back as if it might bruise. That was how the morning went. One object after another. And each one pulled a thread from somewhere deep inside her. A stack of old flower pots reminded her of the tomatoes Daniel had grown when money was tight. A cracked toaster reminded her of the year she kept using it by holding the lever down with a butter knife because there was no room in the budget for a new one. A pile of folded paper grocery bags brought back the exact sound of her mother's voice. Save those. They're still good. To Maura, these were objects. To Evelyn, they were witnesses. By noon, the garage floor looked worse instead of better. Things had been dragged into the light, and somehow that felt more dangerous than when they had been hidden away on shelves. Maura stood with her hands on her hips, sweating a little, her hair escaping its clip. Mom, she said, trying for patience. Some of this is just fear. Evelyn turned sharply. No. Some of this is experience. Maura opened her mouth, then closed it again. It was Owen who broke the silence. What's that box? He stood near the back wall beside Daniel's workbench. Half hidden under an old drop cloth was a plain cardboard box sealed with yellowed tape. No label. No writing. Just dust on top, thick enough to show where Owen's fingers had brushed it clean. Evelyn's pulse stumbled. For one strange second, the garage seemed to tilt. She knew that box. Daniel had carried it in himself not long before he got sick. Set it beneath the bench. Told her they would sort it later. Later never came. Owen crouched to pull it out. Is it Grandpa's stuff? Don't, Evelyn said. But he had already lifted it. The box was not heavy, yet the sight of it in his hands hit her like a door slamming open inside her chest. She saw Daniel at the workbench, rubbing his wrist after a long day. Saw his cap hanging by the back door. Saw the shape of him in all the spaces the house had never quite filled again. Maura stepped closer. Mom, put that down. Her voice came out too loud, too sharp. Owen froze. It's just a box, Maura said carefully. And that was the wrong thing to say. Something hot and fierce rose through Evelyn so quickly it frightened even her. No, she snapped. It is not just a box. The garage went still. Owen lowered it at once, but the damage was done. The past was in the room now, breathing, listening, waiting. Evelyn stared at the taped edges, her throat tightening around words she did not want to speak. Because suddenly she understood that the most dangerous thing in this house was not what she might lose. It was what she had never allowed herself to touch. For the rest of that afternoon, The garage stayed untouched. Maura made sandwiches no one really wanted. Owen offered twice to finish stacking the keep pile, then stopped asking when he saw the look on Evelyn's face. By 3 o'clock, the house had gone into that strange kind of silence that only comes after an argument that never fully exploded. Cabinets closed softly. Footsteps were careful. Even the old floorboards seemed to creak less, as if they too had decided not to provoke her. Evelyn sat alone at the kitchen table long after Maura and Owen left. The table was crowded, as always. A stack of mail. A ceramic bowl holding cough drops and spare keys. 2 folded dish towels. A grocery flyer from last week. A glass jar of pens, most of them dry. In the middle of it all sat her untouched cup of coffee, gone cold hours ago. She looked at the mess and, for once, did not see comfort. She saw noise. The late afternoon light came in thin and gold through the window above the sink, catching dust in the air. It settled over everything with a soft mercy, making even the clutter look gentle. But Evelyn felt no gentleness in herself. Only a deep, tired ache, as if something old inside her had finally been forced to stand up after years of hiding in the dark. "It's just a box." Maura's words came back to her, and Evelyn closed her eyes. No, that had been the problem. It was never just a box. Never just a coat, or a stack of saved bags, or a cracked toaster, or a drawer full of rubber bands. People who had never been hungry loved the phrase just clutter. Just old things. Just let it go. But nothing had ever been just anything to Evelyn. Not after the life she had lived. She got up slowly and moved to the sink, though she had no real reason to. She stood there with her hands braced against the counter, looking out at the wet backyard, where the grass had grown uneven and the bird bath leaned slightly to one side. Daniel used to level it every spring. He would carry a little shovel out there and fuss with it until the water sat still and round as glass. Her throat tightened. "Lord," she whispered, though she wasn't sure whether she was praying or simply speaking because the quiet had grown too heavy. "What am I doing?" The kitchen gave no answer. So she answered herself. She was keeping things. That was the obvious part. But beneath that, deeper than the boxes and bags and jars and old receipts, she was keeping something else alive. Fear. The word came into her head so clearly it startled her. Fear of needing something she had thrown away. Fear of wasting what once cost too much. Fear of waking up one morning with no backup plan, no extra blanket, no saved jar, no old checkbook, no proof that she had prepared for disaster like a decent woman should. But that wasn't all of it. There was grief in it too. Grief packed into garage shelves. Grief folded into the linen closet. Grief stacked in the hallway and tucked into drawers and balanced in old boxes under beds. After Daniel died, people brought casseroles, flowers, sympathy cards, soft voices, and promises to check in. Then slowly, like water draining from a tub, they went back to their lives. Maura had her own home. Owen had school and friends and the distracted speed of being young. Neighbors waved. Church ladies called. But at the end of the day, the house was still hers alone. And it was too quiet. So she kept things. A broken lamp waiting to be fixed. A jacket of Daniel's still smelling faintly of sawdust and winter air. A grocery list in his handwriting. Old manuals for appliances long gone. Nails in coffee cans. Buttons in tins. Paper bags under the sink. Every item said the same thing in its own small language. Not yet. Don't throw me away. I might still matter. And maybe, in some hidden place she had never dared look directly at, Evelyn had heard another message beneath it. If these things still matter, maybe the life they belong to still does too. She sank into the chair again, more heavily this time. The truth came slowly, like something thawing. She had told herself the clutter was about preparedness. About being sensible. About respecting what things cost. But sometimes, late at night, she had stood in the hallway and felt hemmed in by her own house, unable to breathe fully, unable to move without brushing against some old leftover piece of another year. And even then, she had not admitted the real thing. The stuff made the rooms feel occupied. The stacks gave shape to the silence. The boxes filled corners where loneliness might otherwise sit down and stay. The old things asked nothing from her except to remain. People changed. People left. People died. Objects stayed where you put them. A tear slipped down before she could stop it. Then another. Evelyn pressed the heel of her hand to her mouth, but once the crying started, it came with the helpless force of weather. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just deep. The kind that seems to rise from 30 years down. "I was afraid," she whispered to the empty kitchen. The words hung in the room. Afraid of becoming helpless. Afraid of outliving usefulness. Afraid that if she let too much go, there would be nothing left to prove she had once held a family together with thrift and stubbornness and 2 tired hands. Afraid that if she opened Daniel's box, whatever still remained of him might somehow leave the house for good. By the time the phone rang, Evelyn's face was wet and her chest hurt from trying not to make a sound. She looked at the screen. Maura. For a long moment, she thought about letting it ring. Then she answered. Neither of them spoke right away. At last Maura said very softly, "Mom, I'm sorry for pushing." Evelyn stared at the fading light on the kitchen floor. Then, in a voice so thin it hardly sounded like her own, she said, "Come back tomorrow." Maura went quiet. And Evelyn added, "But when we go into that garage again, we open his box." The next morning arrived clear and cold, with a hard kind of sunlight that left no corner softened. Evelyn was already dressed when Maura and Owen came in. She had put on a blue cardigan she hadn't worn in months and pinned her thinning hair back with more care than usual. Her face still looked tired, but there was something else there now too. Not peace. Not yet. But resolve, thin and fragile as first ice. No one said much on the way to the garage. The box sat where Owen had set it down the day before, half in shadow beneath Daniel's workbench. In the morning light, it looked smaller than Evelyn remembered. That almost made her angry. How could something carry so much weight and take up so little room? Owen glanced at her. "Do you want me to get it?" Evelyn nodded once. He lifted it gently and carried it to the workbench, setting it down as if it might contain something living. Maura stood on the other side, silent, her hands folded tight. For a moment, the three of them only stared. Then Evelyn reached for the tape. It had gone dry with age. It split under her fingernail with a brittle tearing sound that seemed far too loud in the still garage. The flaps opened stiffly. Inside was Daniel. Not the man himself, of course, but the ordinary little remains of him. The things a life leaves behind when it has been too busy being lived to imagine one day it will be packed into cardboard. On top lay his old wristwatch, the brown leather strap cracked at the bend. Beside it was a folded handkerchief, neatly washed. A stack of receipts tied with string. A pair of reading glasses with one loose arm. His pocket knife. A postcard from a lake they had visited on their 20th anniversary. And under all that, resting flat at the bottom, a plain white envelope with Evelyn written across the front in Daniel's hand. Her breath caught. For a second she could not move. That handwriting. Slightly slanted, steady, practical. The kind of handwriting that had made grocery lists, signed school forms, labeled Christmas boxes in the basement, written little notes that said back by 6 or mower needs gas. She picked up the envelope with both hands. Maura's voice came softly. "Mom." Evelyn shook her head. Not because she wanted them away, but because if she tried to answer, she knew her voice would break. She opened the envelope carefully and unfolded the letter. The paper trembled in her fingers before she had even read the first line. "Evie, if you're reading this, then I've probably done what I always swore I wouldn't do and left you with a mess to sort through." A broken laugh escaped her then, sudden and wet. Daniel. Even now, finding a way to step lightly into a hard moment. She kept reading. "I know you. You'll keep everything because it feels safer that way. You'll say it can still be used, fixed, mended, saved. And maybe some of it can. But listen to me, sweetheart. Survival got us through. It did its job. But survival is not the same thing as living. The garage seemed to blur around her. She blinked hard and went on. You made a home out of not enough. You stretched dollars, repaired what couldn't be repaired, fed us, warmed us, carried us. I know what things mean to you. I know every jar and box and coat feels like proof you were ready when life got hard. But you do not have to spend the rest of your years guarding what hardship taught you. Home was never the stuff, Evie. It was you. A sound came out of Maura then, quiet as a breath. Owen looked down at the concrete floor, his jaw tight. Evelyn kept reading, though now the words swam. Keep what is precious. Keep what is useful. Keep what truly carries love. But don't keep fear just because it once kept us alive. If I go first, promise me this. Make room. For sunlight. For peace. For people. For yourself. The last line was shorter. You've already survived enough. Evelyn lowered the letter. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The air in the garage felt changed somehow, as if the walls had pulled back an inch. She looked down into the box again. At the watch. The pocket knife. The postcard. The receipts from years so ordinary they had once felt forgettable. And suddenly she understood why she had never opened it. She had been afraid it would prove how little was left. Instead, it proved the opposite. A life did not vanish because its objects were few. Love did not disappear because it was not stacked in every room. Memory did not need a crowded house to survive. Maura stepped closer, tears bright in her eyes. Mom. Evelyn pressed the letter to her chest. I thought if I kept enough, she said, her voice trembling, I could keep bad things from happening again. Maura reached for her hand. And Evelyn, still staring at Daniel's handwriting, whispered the hardest truth she had said in years. I think I've been protecting myself from a world that already passed. Then Owen, careful as always, pointed into the box. Grandma, what are you going to keep? Evelyn looked down. The watch. The postcard. The letter. Only a few things. For the first time in a very long while, that did not feel like loss. It felt like permission. They began with one shelf. Not the whole garage. Not the house. Not some dramatic all-at-once miracle people on television always seemed able to pull off between breakfast and dinner. Just one shelf beneath the workbench, where old paint cans stood beside coffee tins of nails and 3 warped flower pots nested inside each other like tired birds. Evelyn set Daniel's letter in the pocket of her cardigan before she touched a single thing. All right, she said, her voice still tender from crying but steadier now. We do this my way. Maura nodded. Owen waited. Evelyn pointed to 3 open spaces on the floor. Useful now. She pointed to the second. Meaningful enough to keep. Then the third. Ready to release. Maura smiled faintly. Those are better names. They're honest names, Evelyn said. So they started. The first thing Evelyn picked up was a rusted can of screws. She pulled off the lid and looked inside. Most were orange with age. Several had fused together in a sad little knot of corrosion. Ready to release, she said. Maura did not react too quickly. She only bent and placed it carefully in the third space, as if honoring a decision that had cost more than the object was worth. Then came the flower pots. 2 were cracked clean through. Release, Evelyn said again. A third was still sound, just dusty. Useful now. Owen carried it to the first pile with surprising seriousness, like a young priest handling something sacred. Piece by piece, the shelf began to breathe. There were paint stirrers saved from projects 20 years old. A box of curtain hooks for curtains long gone. A broken flashlight with batteries leaking white dust. Twine so brittle it snapped when Owen lifted it. Some things went easily. Some did not. When Maura found a stack of folded paper grocery bags, she held them up without speaking. Evelyn took one, ran her thumb over the softened crease, and for a moment she was back in her mother's kitchen, smoothing Christmas wrapping paper beside a window rimmed with frost. She used to save everything, Evelyn murmured. Maura waited. She wasn't foolish, Evelyn said. She was scared. We all were. Then she looked at the bags again and let out a long breath. We don't need 43 of them. Maura's mouth twitched. 43. I counted once. That made Owen laugh, and to Evelyn's surprise, she laughed too. It had been a long time since any kind of cleaning had brought laughter into that house. By afternoon, the garage floor held a growing donation box, 2 garbage bags, and a much smaller pile of things Evelyn had chosen to keep. Not because they might one day rescue her from disaster, but because they still held a real place in the life she was living now. Daniel's watch. The brass lion button from his winter coat. A small set of tools that still worked. 3 flower pots. A blanket for the guest room. The postcard from the lake. Not 20 blankets. Not 7 broken lamps. Not every object grief had once hidden behind. At one point Owen disappeared into the kitchen and came back with his phone. Grandma, he said, what about the pictures in the hall closet? The loose ones in those old envelopes. Evelyn looked up from a tin of nails. What about them? We could scan them, he said. So you still have them, but they don't have to live in 6 different boxes forever. Evelyn wiped her hands on her slacks. You can do that. Owen grinned. I can do a lot of things you think require magic. So later, while Mara carried out a bag of donations, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with Owen and watched him place old photographs one by one under the soft light of his phone stand. Daniel in front of the first car they bought used. Mara at 10, missing both front teeth. Evelyn herself at a church picnic, laughing at something outside the frame. You were pretty cool, Grandma, Owen said. She gave him a look. Was. He smiled without looking up. Ah. Sorry. For a little while, the work changed shape. It stopped feeling like disposal and started feeling like translation. A life moved from crowded drawers into stories. From boxes into memory. From fear into something lighter. Still, each goodbye carried its own small sting. When Evelyn lifted one of Daniel's old jackets from a hook behind the garage door, she held it longer than she meant to. The fabric was stiff at the cuffs, the shoulders still shaped faintly by the man who had worn it through rain, snow, and too many winters of responsibility. Mara came up beside her. You can keep it. Evelyn shook her head slowly. No, she said. I can keep loving him without keeping every sleeve he ever wore. Her own words seemed to surprise her. She folded the jacket once, pressed her hand against it, and laid it in the donation box before she could change her mind. That was the moment the room went very quiet. Even Owen stopped moving. Because everyone understood they had just crossed some invisible line. Evelyn straightened, one hand resting briefly over the letter in her cardigan pocket. The garage looked different now. Not finished. Far from it. But changed. There was actual space along one wall. The workbench had reappeared in places. Light from the side window touched the concrete floor where clutter had blocked it for years. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, the emptiness did not frighten her. It invited her. The next morning, Evelyn stood outside the spare room with her hand on the knob and did not turn it right away. The door had stayed shut for so long that even the paint around the frame looked undisturbed, as if the house itself had learned not to breathe too hard near it. Behind that door were boxes she had stacked in the dazed, colorless weeks after Daniel's funeral. Things people had handed her. Things she had pulled from closets and drawers because she could not decide what they meant anymore. Things she had hidden not because they were useful, but because they hurt. Mara waited a few steps behind her. Owen said nothing. At last, Evelyn opened the door. The smell hit first. Dust. Paper. Cedar from an old storage chest near the window. Then the room came into view, and for a moment Evelyn could only stand there and look. The bed was buried beneath boxes. A reading chair had become a coat rack for old winters. The dresser was lost under photo albums, sympathy cards, folded table linens, and grocery sacks full of things she no longer even remembered saving. Sunlight pushed through the blinds in thin gold bars, landing on a row of taped cardboard cartons against the far wall. One of them had Daniel written on it. Another, holiday. Another, important. Important. The word almost made her smile. People put that on boxes when they do not know what else to call their pain. She stepped inside. Dust rose softly underfoot. Maura moved toward the bed, then stopped and looked back, asking permission without speaking. Evelyn gave one small nod. So they began. The room was harder than the garage. Not because the objects were larger or heavier, but because almost every one of them carried some small ache. A shirt Maura wore in middle school. A table runner Evelyn had ironed for Thanksgiving when Daniel still carved the turkey at the head of the table. A stack of sympathy cards written in the careful handwriting of people who had meant well, then gone quiet with time. At one point Owen held up a little wooden truck with one wheel missing. "What's this?" Evelyn blinked, then smiled through the ache. "Yours, actually. You used to roll it across my kitchen floor and drive me half crazy with the noise." Owen laughed. "I was adorable. You were loud." He said it in the meaningful pile. Then Maura opened the box marked important. Inside were papers carefully bundled. Insurance forms, tax returns, old bank statements, a few letters, and beneath them, a thin photo album Evelyn had not seen in years. She opened it on the dresser. There was Daniel at 23, grinning beside a car that broke down more than it ran. There was Maura at 5, covered in flour after helping bake biscuits. There was Evelyn herself on a beach, hair whipped across her face, looking younger than she felt she had ever truly been. For a long while, no one spoke. Then Evelyn closed the album and said, "This one stays." Not because it proved anything. Not because disaster might come. Not because fear needed feeding. It stayed because it was love. By afternoon, the room began to change. Boxes emptied. Trash bags filled. A donation pile grew in the hallway. Owen scanned more photographs. Maura folded linens for the shelter downtown. Evelyn kept only what still had a place in the life ahead of her, not the life behind her. A few things surprised her by how easy they were to release. Old bills. Stacks of dried-out pens. Duplicate kitchen towels. Shoes she had not worn since before Owen was born. Other things took more courage. Daniel's fishing hat. A casserole dish from a neighbor who had died 10 years ago. A box of Christmas cards saved because she could not bear to throw away handwriting from people already gone. But Daniel's letter stayed in her pocket, and every time her resolve trembled, her fingers brushed the envelope and steadied again. By evening, the spare room had a floor. A real floor. The bed emerged first, then the chair by the window, then the top of the dresser. Maura pulled up the blinds. Light spilled in full and warm, not in narrow stripes now but in great generous sheets. Dust still hung in the air, but it no longer felt like the room was suffocating on its own history. Evelyn stood in the doorway, tired clear down to her bones. And peaceful. Not perfectly. Not all at once. Grief does not work that way. Fear does not leave in one heroic gesture. But something had shifted. Something real. That Sunday, she invited Maura and Owen over for coffee. Not to help. Not to sort. Just to come. When they arrived, the kitchen table was clear except for 3 mugs, a plate of store-bought cookies, and a small vase holding cut flowers from the yard. The hallway looked wider. The living room lamp shone on open space where a tower of boxes had once stood. From down the hall, the spare room door stood open, and sunlight rested quietly on the made bed inside. Maura stopped just past the threshold and looked around without speaking. Owen smiled first. "Wow." Evelyn gave a small shrug, though her eyes were shining. "It's still my house." "Yes," Maura said softly. "It is." They sat together at the table, and for a while they talked about ordinary things. School. Church. The tomatoes Owen wanted to grow that summer in one of the flower pots from the garage. Nothing grand. Nothing dramatic. That, more than anything, made the moment feel holy. At last, Evelyn looked around the kitchen, then down at her hands wrapped around the warm mug. "I thought I was saving all this for a hard day," she said. "I didn't realize I was making every day harder." No one rushed to answer. They did not need to. Because the truth was already there, resting in the clean corners, in the open doorways, in the quiet that no longer felt empty. Outside, the late sun touched the yard, the leaning bird bath, the windows Daniel had once repaired with his own hands. Inside, the house felt lighter, as if it had been holding its breath for years and had finally exhaled. And Evelyn, sitting there with the people she loved and only the things that still carried love back to her, understood something she wished she had known sooner. Letting go was not losing her past. It was making room to live the rest of her life.